It was a typical fall morning on the campus of Marston University, one of the most prestigious yet ideologically rigid institutions on the East Coast. The leaves outside danced in amber spirals, but inside Lecture Hall B, the atmosphere was anything but light. Students filed into the large auditorium for Professor Alan Grayson's weekly lecture on modern ethical structures. Known for his commanding voice and unapologetically progressive stance, Professor Grayson was loved by many and feared by just as many. Today's lecture topic was already displayed on the projector screen. Moral constructs, human-made or divine. Among the students taking their seats was Daniel Hart, a soft-spoken sophomore majoring in philosophy. Unlike most students at Marston, Daniel didn't shy away from his identity. He was Christian, deeply so. He wore a silver cross around his neck, not large, not flashy, but enough to draw attention in a place like this. Most students ignored him. Some whispered. One even left a copy of Nietzsche's God is Dead, quote, folded on his desk the previous week. Daniel never retaliated. He didn't protest or preach. He listened, he questioned, but most importantly, he thought. As the class began, Professor Grayson launched into a powerful opening monologue about the evolution of ethics, how moral systems were forged by socio-political necessity, not by any higher power. The room nodded in agreement. Daniel listened respectfully, but sat straight, aware of where this lecture would likely go. Then came the inevitable moment. Professor Grayson closed his laptop, walked to the edge of the stage, and scanned the room. His eyes settled on Daniel. "Mr. Hart," he said, his voice tinged with amusement, "you've been awfully quiet this semester. Surely, as our resident theist, you have thoughts on today's premise?" The room turned to face Daniel. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the spotlight, but unafraid. "I believe that moral law has an origin that transcends human design, that without an objective moral source, everything becomes relative, and, eventually, meaningless." A few students shifted uncomfortably. Some snickered. Grayson tilted his head and stepped closer. "So, you're saying our ancestors, who practiced slavery, executed heretics, and burned people for witchcraft, were merely obeying divine law?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I'm saying that people often twist divine principles to serve their own power. But the existence of counterfeits doesn't disprove the real thing." Gasps. A few people even clapped, briefly. Professor Grayson's expression tightened. He walked slowly back to the podium and chuckled dryly into the microphone. "And this, class, is why religious absolutism is dangerous. When someone believes they speak for God, they stop listening to reason. They lose the ability to evolve. They become fossils." The laughter was louder this time. Daniel sat still, humiliated but composed. His ears burned, but his spine stayed straight. Professor Grayson smiled, satisfied. "Anyone else care to defend fairy tales?" Daniel looked down, not in defeat, but in thought. He didn't know it yet, but this exchange had been recorded. A student in the third row had hit record on their phone the moment Professor Grayson addressed Daniel. They'd seen something more than just a disagreement. They'd seen a line being crossed. And somewhere in Canada, a video link would soon land in the inbox of someone who had faced this battle more times than anyone else. Dr. Jordan Peterson. By the next morning, the footage of Daniel's exchange with Professor Grayson had already made its way from group chats to campus-wide forums. The clip, just under 2 minutes, was titled, "Christian Student Publicly Shamed for Believing in God." It wasn't clickbait. It was reality. The video opened with Grayson's mocking tone and ended with the sting of his fossils remark. Daniel's calm, reasoned response had been preserved too, but it was the professor's belittling laughter that ignited the online fire. Within 12 hours, the clip had spread beyond Marston University. It appeared on Reddit, then Twitter, then TikTok. Influencers on both sides of the political spectrum began sharing it, some in outrage, others in smug satisfaction. On campus, things escalated quickly. Flyers with Daniel's face appeared on corkboards and bathroom stalls. Religious bigotry is not free speech. You can't debate science with superstition. He wants to drag us back to the Dark Ages. Daniel became a walking target, his email inbox flooded with anonymous messages. Go back to church, freak. Enjoy your 15 minutes, martyr. You've embarrassed this university. But not all voices were hateful. A quiet but growing number of students began to speak up, not necessarily Christians, but those who had seen the exchange for what it was: intellectual bullying masked as progress. One sociology major tweeted, "I don't even believe in God, but watching that video made me sick." That kid answered respectfully and got torn apart for it. In the philosophy department lounge, professors split into factions. Some defended Grayson as a challenger of dogma. Others whispered about crossing ethical lines in pedagogy. Daniel, meanwhile, stopped going to the dining hall. He avoided the quad. His once routine life had become a spotlight he never asked for. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, his phone buzzed with a Twitter mention that made his heart freeze. Jordan Peterson liked your post. It was the clip. Someone had tagged Dr. Jordan Peterson under the video hours earlier. And now, the fire had drawn a figure who knew all too well what it meant to be mocked by institutions and defend unpopular truths. By Friday morning, Jordan Peterson had done more than like the post. He had quote-tweeted it. This is exactly what happens when universities become ideological echo chambers instead of places of real education. I'll be addressing this in detail soon. In Peterson's words, "I'll be addressing this in detail soon," was not a vague promise. It was a storm warning. And Marston University was not ready for what came next. It was Monday morning when the announcement hit the university's internal email system. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson to host open forum at Marston University, Wednesday 6 p.m., Grand Auditorium. Shockwaves. Within 10 minutes, Franker Peterson at Marston was trending locally. Within an hour, the protests had already begun. Campus groups issued immediate statements. We oppose the platforming of hate speech. This is a threat to our intellectual safety. Jordan Peterson's presence is an act of violence. Flyers were torn down as fast as they were put up. A student-run petition to cancel the event gathered 5,000 signatures in 24 hours. But it was too late. The university administration had invited him, perhaps out of damage control, perhaps out of fear. Public pressure from donors, media, and alumni had forced their hand. After all, Marston marketed itself as a place of diverse thought and free expression. And now they were being called to prove it. Daniel Hart, meanwhile, sat quietly in his dorm room. He hadn't asked for any of this. He had simply spoken what he believed. And yet, now the university felt like a battlefield where both sides were using his name as ammunition. When Wednesday came, the campus was under the kind of tension that felt physical. Police were stationed outside the Grand Auditorium. Protesters chanted with megaphones. Others held signs that read, "No to patriarchy disguised as reason. Bigots don't belong here. Marston is for minds, not myths." Inside the packed hall, it was silent. Students, faculty, and media filled every seat. Some came to cheer. Others came to sneer. But all came for one reason. Jordan Peterson was about to speak. He stepped onto the stage in his signature dark three-piece suit, holding a stack of notes, but not looking at them. His voice, calm, clear, deliberate, cut through the silence like a scalpel. I watched the video. A professor challenged a student, not to learn, but to shame. He asked a question not in curiosity, but in contempt. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not education. That is tyranny dressed in a robe. A mixture of cheers and boos echoed through the hall. Peterson continued, "I've debated some of the most brilliant atheists in the world. Never once have I laughed at them. Why? Because I respect thought. I respect conscience. But what I saw here was not a clash of ideas. It was a display of dominance, a performance of superiority aimed at a young man who answered with humility. Some students shouted, 'Shame!' from the back. Others stood and applauded. Peterson turned toward the audience and gestured toward a chair on stage. And if Professor Grayson would care to join me, I'd be happy to discuss his ideas, publicly, respectfully, honestly." All eyes turned toward the far end of the auditorium. Professor Grayson was seated, jaw tight, hands clenched. But he didn't move, not an inch. Peterson waited, and when no answer came, he turned back to the crowd. Then let this moment be clear. The refusal to face your own argument in daylight is the loudest admission of weakness. A thunder of applause erupted. People were no longer clapping for Peterson. They were clapping for something far more important: truth. Daniel watched from the third row, heart pounding, eyes wide. For the first time since that humiliating lecture, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel like the only one. Because truth had just walked through the gate, and it hadn't blinked. The forum had ended with standing ovations echoing long after Jordan Peterson stepped off the stage. No mic drop, no theatrics, just reason, principle, and clarity. The campus was never the same after that night. The next morning, posters attacking Daniel had vanished. Some had been torn down, others replaced. In their place were new ones. Free thought lives here. Silence is not consent. Respect is not agreement. Daniel Hart didn't suddenly become popular. He wasn't invited to speak on television or offered any scholarships. But something deeper happened. Something more real. He became seen. Students he had never spoken to approached him on the quad. "Hey, just wanted to say you handled yourself with real class. My brother's religious, too. What happened to you? That shouldn't have happened. You made me think, for real. Thank you." He even received an anonymous note slipped under his dorm door. "You spoke for more of us than you know. Don't stop." Professor Grayson, on the other hand, avoided campus media for weeks. He refused interviews. He canceled one of his lectures. Though he remained in his post, something about him had changed. His words were more measured, his tone less smug. He had been publicly challenged and hadn't answered. But the real shift wasn't about Grayson. It wasn't even about Peterson. It was about a culture, a campus, a generation that was suddenly asking a dangerous question: what if we've only been hearing one side? Peterson's appearance sparked debates in classrooms, over coffee, in dorm lounges. Professors who once spoke in absolutes now found students raising their hands with unexpected questions. They couldn't just dismiss them anymore. As for Daniel, weeks later, he sat under the large oak tree outside Marston's library, his usual spot, reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. He wore the same silver cross around his neck, but this time it wasn't a quiet declaration. It was a symbol of endurance. And then a notification buzzed on his phone. A new video from Jordan Peterson's official channel. Why I spoke at Marston and what it means for the future of education. Daniel tapped the screen. The opening line played. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet student to expose the loudness of a lie. He smiled, not because he had won, but because he had stood. And in doing so, he had reminded the world that belief, even when unpopular, is not weakness. It is strength.